Okay, welcome to Monday. For those of you who did poorly on the test, remember you can always take a retake. Just send me an email, ask for reteaching. I'll send you a link for that, and then once you finish the reteaching, you can take a retake. All right, so we're going to jump into really big, important, and this is kind of probably where we're going to end the year, is on Chapter 11. Here's your homework. Please copy it down. Okay, today we're going to jump into what are called negative numbers, finally. Most students struggle with negative numbers. Um, uh, Obviously, this is the first time you've dealt with negative numbers. There's a lot of new rules with negative numbers. You're going to have to relearn how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide because of negative numbers. So there's going to be new rules for adding, there's going to be new rules for subtracting, there's going to be new rules for multiplication, new rules for division. Usually takes students at least a year to get very comfortable with negative numbers. For instance, next year by, say, Christmas time, most of you will have a pretty good handle on negative numbers, but it'll take at least into next year for you to really fully grasp negative numbers. So don't panic if you think this is complicated, because it is. Okay, so think about this. If I gave you the problem 3 plus 4, obviously you know the answer is 7. Well, all right, well, think about this. What about subtraction? Well, we know that 5 minus 2 is 3, but visually, once again, the same thing. We know that as numbers go from right to left, they get smaller. 8 is bigger than 4, so 4 is smaller than 8. 0 is smaller than 9. Okay, so if we do 5 minus 2, we start at 5. We get minus subtraction, it means get smaller. We get smaller by 2, so if we count 2, 1, 2, visually, that's why the answer is 3. But the problem with this is that, well, what's 5 minus 8? Well, we could use that same model right here. We start at 5, we get smaller by 8. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Uh-oh, I ran out of numbers. Okay, so obviously we didn't run out of numbers. The numbers to the left of 0 are negative. That is what this lesson is about. Okay, and oh, by the way, you will not be doing adding, subtracting with a number line. All right, so today's class is on negative numbers. In fact, the whole chapter is on negative numbers. So let's draw a complete number line. Grab a piece of paper, let's draw a complete number line. So here's a number line. What number do you want to put in the middle? All right. Well, yeah, I agree, 0. Just so you know that 0 isn't necessarily the middle, right? And any number line can have any middle, but our number line for this one will have 0 as the middle. The numbers to the right of 0 are our positive numbers. So, for instance, I might pick 10. And the numbers to the left of 0 are our negative numbers. If I go the same distance in the opposite direction from 0, I get to negative 10, okay? Now, you can have lots of tick marks in between. Halfway between 0 and 10 is 5. So what's halfway between 0 and negative 10? That's right, negative 5. All right, and I do want you to remember, as numbers go from left to right, they get bigger, and as numbers go from right to left, they get smaller. All right, so your number line should now look, everything that I wrote you should have. Some quick notes on negative numbers. All right, so this year, when we write negative numbers, we're going to put the negative number towards the top of the number itself. You see where I put the negative, negative 5? Next year, that's not how real math people write negative numbers. This is how real math people write negative numbers. Looks like subtract 5. Yeah, subtract 5 and negative 5 we're going to use interchangeably. So sometimes I get lazy and I use next year's notation. Our book tries to, at least it's lazy as well as me sometimes, but our book does a pretty good job of always reusing this year's notation for negative numbers. Okay, so for instance, this number line right here, and any number line I use is going to have next year's notation. So if you see all the negative numbers there, the negative's kind of in the middle. Don't get hung up on that. But what I do want you to get hung up on is the fact that numbers get smaller as you go from right to left. So why is that a big deal? Well, look at the numbers. If we look at just the positive numbers, 10 is bigger than 5 because it's to the right of 5. But if we go to the negative numbers, negative 10 is not bigger than negative 5. Negative 10 is actually smaller than negative 5. So check this out for just negative numbers, not positive numbers. So just for negative numbers, as the number gets, well, I'm going to put in parentheses bigger, right? Its value gets smaller for negative numbers. Here's what I mean. right? If we count -1, -2, -3, it sounds like the numbers are getting bigger because we're used to being 1, 2, 3, you're getting bigger. In reality, for negative numbers, you're actually getting smaller. -5 is smaller than -1. That's not true for positive numbers. 1 is not bigger than 5. But -5 is bigger than -1. So that's the thing you need to wrap your head around. So where are we going with this chapter? Well, I said the whole chapter is on negative numbers. I'm going to teach you how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And then we'll finish up with some graphing. All of these have rules, and they're not the same rules as adding and subtracting with positive numbers. They're different rules. Well, that's a problem because you've been, I don't know, for the last 9 years or so, you've been adding and subtracting with positive numbers. You got to relearn some rules. And that is why, like I said, it usually takes kids a solid, some kids pick it up quickly, but most kids it takes a solid year to wrap your head around. By the time you get to Algebra 1, you don't even think about the rules for add, subtract, multiply, and divide negative numbers. All right, some quick background information. So it's a lot of definitions today. The first definition is something called an opposite. And opposites, plural, are numbers that are the same distance away from 0. Numbers that are the same distance away from 0. Here's a number line. Well, here's where 5 is. How far is 5 away from 0? It's 5 away from 0. Is there another number that's also 5 away from 0 that isn't 5? Sure, -5. -5 and 5 are opposites. -2 and 2 are opposites. -8 and 8 are opposites. -1/2 and 1/2 are opposites. They're just numbers that are the same distance away from 0. Remember chapter 1, we talked about the natural and the whole numbers? Just quick review. The natural numbers I said were caveman numbers, the numbers that were first discovered or invented by humankind, and they were called the counting numbers. Mathematicians call them the natural numbers. Right? You got 1 rock, 2 rock, 3 rock. Along came, we added 0 to them, and that completed our number set, and we say those are the whole numbers. Okay. All right, so continuing on that same line of thought, the positive numbers obviously are numbers that are greater than 0, right? Numbers that are to the right of 0. Okay, any number to the right of 0 is positive. Guess what the next definition will be? That's right, negative numbers. So negative numbers are numbers that are less than 0. In other words, numbers that are to the left of 0. Well, if positive numbers are to the right of 0, negative numbers are to the left of 0, what's 0? Yeah, 0 is the only number that is neither positive or negative. It's 0. It has no value. All right. So, and the reason why we did those definitions is because we're going to introduce to a new number set. And the new number set are called the integers. Those are the positive numbers. Their opposites. Remember, the opposite of 1 is -1. The opposite of 2 is -2. So integers are the positive numbers. Their opposites, and 0 because 0 is neither positive or negative. So this chapter deals with integers. How do you add, subtract, and divide integers? Now, the reason why we got to have new rules is because integers include the negative numbers. No, you don't need new rules for add, subtract, multiply, and divide positive numbers, but you do need new rules for adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing negative numbers. All right. To teach how to add, subtract, that ends up being the hardest rules. The adding, subtracting of negative numbers is the hardest rule. Multiplying, dividing actually ends up being pretty easy. In order to teach you the idea of adding, subtracting, I got to introduce you to a new concept. Write this down, please. It's called absolute value. It is not opposite. It's absolute value. Absolute value is how far a number is away from 0. Kind of sounds like opposite. It's not. How far a number is away from 0. Here's what I mean. I will give you a number, let's say 5, and ask you how far is 5 away from 0. It's 5. Mathematicians use some symbology for absolute value. The symbology for absolute value is 2 vertical line segments. See those 2 parallel lines next to the 5? Those symbols are not parentheses. Those are the absolute value symbols. And what absolute value says is whatever's on the inside, how far is it away from 0? So how far is 5 away from 0? Well, it's 5 units away from 0. Here's another one. The absolute value of -8. How far is -8 away from 0? It's 8. So what do you notice? Notice that the question, how far are you away from 0, will always be positive. The answer to any absolute value problem is positive. It's positive. The absolute value of anything, including 0, right? Well, I take that back because 0 is not positive. So that's the one that's not true. But for any positive or negative number, the absolute value is always positive. Okay, we're going to do 3 games today. The first one's pretty simple. I just ask you, what's the absolute value of a number? So let's do a few of these together. Upper left, what's the absolute value of 2? The question, the absolute value says, how far are you away from 0? So how far is 2 away from 0? It's 2 away from 0. Okay. How far is negative 3 away from 0? It's 3 away from 0. How far is 20? Okay, this is pretty simple, right? How far is 23 away from 0? 23. How far is 125? It's all you're basically doing is stating how far are you away from 0. How far are you away from 0? So the only one that isn't positive is the absolute value of 0, obviously. Okay, so that's the easy one. You're like, well, that's kind of interesting, but what am I ever going to use this for? Well, it turns out that we're going to use absolute value when we talk about adding and subtracting. We're not doing adding and subtracting today. We're just talking about negative numbers today. Tomorrow we'll start adding and subtracting. But we'll use absolute value, and that's how you actually, the rule involves, to add and subtract, the rule involves taking the absolute value of a number. So therefore, you need to know how to do this. Okay, so absolute value isn't very challenging. I said we're going to do a couple games. Here's the next game. We're going to graph numbers on a number line. Okay, so we're going to graph numbers on a number line. To graph numbers on the number line, what do you need first? Well, obviously you need a number line, so there's a number line. The easiest way is to always go from left to right. So what's the smallest number there? The smallest number there is negative 2. So my first tick mark will be negative 2. And then we count up going to the right. So what's bigger than negative 2? Well, negative 1. What's bigger than negative 1? 0. You see how I'm doing this? Then 1, 2, 3. Well, how do I know when I can stop? I can stop when I can have the largest number. Well, the largest number in our number set is 4, so I know I can stop. Okay. Well, it says graph the numbers, so how do you graph the numbers? You put a dot on the number line next to the 4 numbers. Well, the first number was negative 2. The next biggest one was 0. The next biggest one was 3, and then 4. All right, notice where I put the circle, the filled-in circle. It's on the number line itself. It's not above it. It's not below it. It's on the number line and on the tick mark. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so the next thing they'll have you do tonight for homework, they'll say graph the number and its opposite on the number line. So they'll give you a number like 3. Well, what's the opposite of 3? The opposite of 3 is negative 3. Then you'll have to graph those two numbers on the number line. Well, that's pretty easy. So the smallest number there is, that's right, negative 3. And then we just simply count up. So what's 1 bigger than negative 3? Negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, and then 3. Put your 2 dots on negative 3 and 3, and you're done. Makes sense? Yeah, I'm not going to do many of these because it's just basically making a number line. Now remember, the question says you do have to write the opposite. So remember, the definition of opposite are two numbers that are the same distance away from 0. It's not absolute value. The absolute value of 3 is not negative 3. The absolute value of 3 is 3. Okay, so don't confuse those two things, opposites and absolute value. Well, I said we're going to do 3 games. So the last game is to find the distance between two numbers. Okay, so it says use an arrow to represent each integer as described. So it says negative 3 starting at 0. Negative 3 starting at 0. Here's what they mean. Well, you start with a number line. It says negative 3 starting at 0. So negative 3 starting at 0, well, the smallest number there is negative 3. And if I start at 0, well, I need to have 0 on my number line. So now I have 0 and negative 3. So it says negative 3 starting at 0. So if I start at 0, I'm right there, and I'm going to negative 3. So there are 3 units from 0 to negative 3. Do you see the pattern we're doing there? So it says negative 3 starting at 0. I think we need to do another one, right? Okay, negative 3 starting at 2. Negative 3 starting at 2. So let's see, we start at 2, and we got to go to negative 3. Therefore, I need to have a negative 3. That's smaller than 2. Then we count up until we get to 2 on our number line. Doing a lot of number lines today. Well, negative 2 is where we start from, and we're going to negative 3. So how many units is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5 units. Okay? So that is what they're asking you to do for homework. Those are the two examples there in the book. Let's just do one more. 2 starting at -1. So the smaller number there is -1, and I got to go up to 2, 0, 1, 2. So 2 starting at -1. So if I start at -1, I'm starting there, and I'm going towards 2. How many units is that? 1, 2, 3. That's 3 units. Okay, so that last part, you'll understand why we're doing this tomorrow when we do adding and subtracting. But it's sort of to get you to the idea of how many units it is between a positive and a negative number. Okay? All right. Well, yeah, that kind of does it for today. There's your homework again. If you have any problems, send me an email for the Shepherd and who else sent me an email today? Was it Shepherd or was it your sister? I forget who sent. Somebody sent me an email early on saying, "Hey, there was no audio on the video." So for those of you that sent those emails to me, thanks a lot. And I will see you guys on Wednesday.